Right now on the Daily Debrief, prosecutors say this surveillance video shows a Florida defendant buying concrete and potting soil before she buried a murder victim in concrete and potting soil. But
she can lift heavy things. It would hurt her back.
Does the state have it all wrong? And malfunctioning cameras are now under review in the jailhouse death of Jeffrey Epstein. Plus, sentencing for a wife convicted of killing her husband in a military love triangle. The Daily Debrief recaps today in court. It's Thursday, August 29th.
Welcome to the Debrief, everybody. Aaron Keller, good to see you here this evening, along with Bernarda Villalona and Brian Buckmeyer among our panelists. Day 4 of the prosecution of the former Florida crime scene investigator accused of murdering a former police officer. Prosecutors are racing to wrap up the case tomorrow at the request of the judge. Defendant Ashley McArthur is accused of shooting victim Taylor Wright in the back of the head and then hiding the remains on property owned by the victim's aunt. The state says the motive was money, but the defendant says she didn't do it. The case became more visual late last evening, with the prosecutor showing the jury several dozen videos and photos. Among the images were these pictures of a trailer and a barn on property where a witness testified to finding the victim's remains. The images showed a wooded area near a barn where the gruesome discovery was made, and later the excavation of what was left of the victim. Here's the witness who made that terrible discovery.
Brought cadaver dogs over there. We went back to the barn, and me and two other Fish and Wildlife officers, we decided to walk down the fence line where we'd seen this area. We were walking down this fence line. I saw some branches that were piled up on the edge of the woods, and they were fresh, about the same age as the ones that were on the property. So I told him to hold up, let's see what this is. I started pulling them away. Underneath it, I found it was a pile of potting soil and concrete. I noticed a small metal grommet from a tarp on the ground. Officer Petty, who was with me, he lifted a piece of the concrete up, and when he did, he uncovered just a bunch of maggots. He put it back down, and then I looked to the right probably a couple of feet, and I saw a portion of a human skull that was exposed from the ground.
Authorities say the victim had been buried in potting soil and concrete. The medical examiner who identified the recovered bones testified that the victim had been shot from the back of the head.
This is an entrance gunshot wound to the skull. The reason I know that is because it's perfectly round, well, almost perfectly round, and it's got inwardly beveled defects, which means it has a little bit of an angle on the edge, on the inner edge. This is a defect in the skull which could represent simply a skull fracture that blew out, or a skull fracture that got eaten or taken away by predators after death. But this is actually where the bullet tried to exit. So you can see it entered here and tried to exit here.
What was the direction of the gunshot wound?
It went from her back to her front. It also went upwards and very slightly from her right to her left side. Body that is exposed to the elements, especially water. Water does real damage to our flesh. I've seen a person almost completely skeletonized in just 10 days. So this is consistent with the last known alive.
Prosecutors also showed the jury this concerning picture of the defendant and the victim together. The defense said during opening statements that the state didn't have enough evidence linking McArthur to the crime, but the state says GPS location data from her Jeep places her at the location where the victim's body turned up.
On September the 9th of 2017, that Jeep was at the property at 9:12 a.m. for 2 hours.
What time did it get there?
7:11 a.m.
And how long was it there?
for 2 hours until 9:12 a.m.
And the next time?
At 1:25 p.m. for 29 minutes. September the 10th, 2017 at 4:28 p.m. for 28 minutes.
All right, next page.
September the 13th, 2017 at 11:51 a.m. for 50 minutes.
All right, next page.
September the 16th, 2017 at 10:33 a.m. for 11 minutes.
Prosecutors, of course, allege that Ashley McArthur buried the victim's body with potting soil and concrete. This video shows the defendant purchasing what authorities say are the same types of items they found with the body. The defendant paid with cash but kept the receipt from this nearby Home Depot. Police found it and retrieved this surveillance footage. The items purchased included fast-setting concrete, which the defendant specifically requested because apparently she was in a hurry. She also bought potting mix, cement patcher, notice the quick times there, and lawn soil. The Home Depot employee who assisted with the transaction testified at trial.
She was near my department in the middle of the store.
Okay. And when you asked her if she needed help, what was she looking at, or what was she doing at that point?
She was looking for, well, she was walking towards the concrete and I asked her, did she need help? She said yes. And I was asking her what she was using what she had wanted to get and what she was using it for.
Okay. And what was she looking for?
A fast setting concrete.
At that point, did she have anything else in her cart?
Yes, ma'am.
What was that?
She had 2 bags of potting soil.
And did you help her with the concrete?
Yes, ma'am.
What did you do?
I loaded it into the cart and then walked her up to self-checkout to check out.
And after she checked out, did you walk her to her Jeep?
Yes, ma'am.
Now, one drawback for the state is the lack of a definitive murder weapon. The prosecution merely has a possible murder weapon.
Is it possible that the bullet from Taylor Wright's skull was fired from that .38?
It is possible, based on the class characteristics of the bullet compared to the class characteristics of the firearm. The bullet that I received, I was able to measure the diameter to come up with caliber class. I was able to count the numbers of lands and grooves and which direction the twist of the rifling went. I was not able to measure the lands and grooves because it either was too damaged or the shoulders, which is the transition zone from land to groove, the shoulders were too weak to measure. And so when I did my examination, I was looking at the tests that I made from the firearm and then comparing the lands and grooves on the unknown bullet, and they were pretty close. So the discernible characteristics are the same from the gun to the bullet.
Remember, the defendant's ex-boyfriend said she gave him that gun. Here now is some of his other colorful testimony.
When the girl come up missing, like, she told me her friend was missing, you know.
Okay. And what did she say about her friend being missing?
The police had took her phone, or she told me that the girl had ran off with her husband's money or something, and just like this, gone.
Okay. And what else did she say about finding her?
That she told me they'll never find that bitch. She's gone.
She said they'll never find that bitch. She's gone?
Correct.
Okay. Now, do you know if Ashley McArthur carried a gun?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And where would you see these guns?
Normally in her Jeep.
Did Miss McArthur also give you a Smith & Wesson .38?
Yes, ma'am.
And what did you do initially with that gun?
I traded it off the gun for him also.
Okay. And were you able to track it down a few weeks ago for law enforcement?
Yes, ma'am.
When did Ashley McArthur give you that .38?
A short period of time before she went to jail.
Say that again?
A short period of time before she went to jail.
And when she gave it to you, did she say anything about it?
She just told me it was like a cheap gun. She didn't care what I did with it.
Authorities tried but ultimately failed to link the defendant directly to the burial site through DNA. One promising item was a coat found in the barn near where the victim's body was dumped. Here is how the DNA analyst described her testing procedures for that item.
I tested it for the presence of blood, and it had 2 areas on the back that gave a weak positive indication for the possible presence of blood. So I took cuttings from both of those areas, plus I swabbed the raincoat for wearer, and all 3 of them had so little DNA that it got dropped at the quantitation state.
So basically, of all the evidence that you received for your DNA analysis for the presence of blood, you found nothing that connected my client, Ashley McArthur, to these items. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Four guests are with us tonight here on The Debrief. Let's begin with Judge Brandon Birmingham in Dallas and attorney Michelle Rayner-Goolsby in Florida. So, Michelle, the state was careful not to present a definitive murder weapon. That makes sense to me because the so-called science of matching a bullet to a gun is frequently attacked as fake science. What do you think of the ultimate tactic as it played out here?
I understand why the state did what they did, because if I'm a defense attorney, I'm jumping on them. And also, I think that even in their closing, that the defense attorneys need to jump on that as well. Listen, we don't know what the weapon is. It was possible. There's no definitive match to that. And I think that if I'm the defense attorney for Ashley, I would keep hammering that in. Yes, so she may have had these guns, but you cannot match that bullet to this gun.
Exactly. Judge Birmingham, to you now. The judge really wants to wrap the case up by the end of the week. There's going to be closing arguments tomorrow. Sometimes that makes me nervous because the double jeopardy clause of the Constitution only gives the state one shot at a prosecution. Is the judge rushing this case? And if not, why not?
Well, I think that the judge always wants to make sure that the jurors make the right decision. You never want to rush a jury. You can give them as much time. I know that in my court, I let the jurors decide for themselves when they want to deliberate and basically for how long they want to deliberate until they give me some indication that they're deadlocked. These are all considerations that the judge is going to keep in mind. I understand that there's Hurricane Dorian bearing down on Florida. So that's the things that you juggle as a judge is the weather and schedules along with the law and due process. It's kind of tricky sometimes.
So much at stake. Let's move on now to our guest here in New York, Bernarda Villalona and Brian Buckmeyer. So, Brian, the defense objected to a prosecution showing of a photo of the defendant pointing a rifle near whoever was holding the camera. I think we have that picture to show people. Is the photo indeed too prejudicial to the defendant to actually be shown to the jury?
I think it depends on who you're asking. As a defense attorney, yeah, as a prosecutor, maybe a layperson, probably not. I don't think it rises to the level of actually moving the needle one way or another because of what the judge said, the comments that were made, and anything like that. But I do think it is slightly prejudicial to see someone with a gun when you're accusing them of using that gun maliciously.
Bernarda Villalona. Now, other pictures were shown to the jury that did not result in an objection, and they also showed the defendant with guns and being around people with guns, but no objection on these. I thought the defense was really trying to slice a thin issue here and say, well, these pictures are okay, but some other ones aren't.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think the issue is with this particular picture is that, one, she's actually aiming the gun at something or someone.
She's out hunting.
Yeah, but
it's a pose. I mean, it's the sort of picture that people would take if they're out hunting.
I know, but to put her out there with such also a huge weapon and her taking position with it and aiming, and also who knows what the weight of the weapon is, since they're saying that because of her back issue that she's not able to carry heavy objects. So taking all of that into account, I believe the defense had to do everything that they could in order to try to prevent that picture from coming into evidence or being displayed to the jury.
It flipped in front of the jury very quickly, Brian Buckmeyer. There was the objection. The judge said, no, we're going to move on.
Yeah, the judge moves on, but you always have to remember, when you're doing a trial in front of two judges. You're doing it in front of the judge that's there and present. You're also doing it in front of the judge in appeals. So you've got to also accommodate for both. So some of this conversation might not be for the judge who's in front of you. It might be the argument for the appellate judge.
Exactly. Multiple judges in the audience preserve the record. And still ahead tonight here on The Debrief, key points from the defense case in the Ashley McArthur trial. Plus, it's not one but two cameras undergoing forensic review in the case of the millionaire pedophile who authorities say killed himself in jail. That case and more when we return. Welcome back to The Debrief. Time now to check in with Chief Investigative Correspondent Brian Ross. He's in the newsroom with what he's working on for tonight. Brian.
Well, good afternoon, Aaron. Today, a federal judge in New York closed out formally the sex trafficking case against Jeffrey Epstein in the wake of his death in a jail cell. But the investigation continues into his associates and others who may have helped him. We'll have Alan Dershowitz, his former lawyer and advisor, on the program live tonight to answer some very tough questions, Aaron.
Brian Ross, a big interview coming up about 15 minutes from now, live on the Law&Crime Network. We'll see you then. And speaking of the Jeffrey Epstein case, the FBI is reportedly investigating two broken surveillance cameras near Epstein's New York jail cell. Reuters described the cameras as malfunctioning and says they have been sent to federal laboratories in Washington for a forensic analysis to see what, if any, information may still be there. Epstein's lawyers have told the judge they doubt that their client committed suicide, even though he signed a new will shortly before his death. Michigan murder defendant Camilla Hassel today learned she will spend life in prison without a chance at parole in a military love triangle murder. The Law&Crime Network brought you Hassel's trial earlier this year, where a jury convicted Hassel of plotting with a boyfriend to kill her husband. The boyfriend flipped, cooperated with authorities, and testified against Hassel. Hassel did not speak at today's sentencing. We're back now to the Ashley McArthur trial with testimony from the first defense witnesses. A chiropractor said the defendant was in a car accident which injured her. The defense seems to be suggesting she could not have carried out the crime due to those injuries.
She was having trouble traveling, sitting or standing, lift overhead, lifting objects off the floor, bend, squat. She had difficulty walk or run. She's asked if her income declined, and she said no. Are you taking pain medication? Yes. Do you see more doctors now than before? Yes. Interference with your ability to see the people that are important to you. And yes, interfere with recreational activities, yes. Family, friends, interaction, yes. Do you feel depressed, tense, anxious, yes. Emotional problems caused by your pain that interfere with your family, social, or work, yes.
The defendant's own mother agreed with the chiropractor and practically laughed when the defense asked her if she seen the defendant carry anything heavy, such as a bag of cement.
She can lift heavy things. It would hurt her back if she did. She'd walk funny and you could tell she was in pain.
Has she, to your knowledge, ever had any surgery since that time?
No, they told her that she'd probably have to have surgery at some point, but they didn't want to do it then because she was young.
And have you ever seen her lift anything like a 50 pounds concrete bag or anything that heavy?
No.
And is that to this day?
Yes.
Another defense witness said he worked several jobs on the property where the victim's body was found. At relevant times to this investigation, he said he saw nothing unusual.
So you were left out, as far as you know, you were out there on the farm by yourself?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Fair to say you probably were out there, give or take, 2 hours?
Hour, give or take, maybe an hour and a half.
All right. Did you notice to see any blood anywhere?
No, sir.
Okay. Did you see any, like, what appeared to be drag marks where something heavy could have been moved anywhere?
No, sir.
Did you see any indications around the property where it looked like maybe recently concrete had been made or anything like that?
No, sir.
What about any potting soil that was, not in pots, but in a different location, kind of unusual location sitting out anywhere?
No, sir.
Did you notice any unusual odors or smells that caught your attention?
No, sir.
What about the second visit?
No, sir.
First visit, any maggots or anything like that anywhere?
No, sir.
Second visit?
No, sir. Not a buzzard in the sky.
Back to our panel yet again tonight, starting with Judge Brandon Birmingham in Dallas, Michelle Rayner-Goolsby in Florida. So, Michelle, the defense has to try to raise some reasonable doubt here, and they attempted to with a couple of witnesses here. What's your assessment of the overall defense case?
As I've said previously, they're doing what they have to do. They're doing their job. They are presenting witnesses. They're trying to poke these holes into the prosecution's case. However, the circumstantial evidence in this case is damning. And as I said before, it's her mama. Her mom is, of course, going to say, I've never seen her lift these heavy things since after the accident. But once again, I don't think it's enough to get beyond a guilty verdict.
Judge Birmingham, you have to build a circumstantial case brick by brick, and here the prosecution took that defense case and then started showing all these pictures of the defendant out on boats, out riding a horse. out hunting, doing all of this other stuff, and the doctor saying, oh, no, this injury would interfere with recreational activities. Well, the pictures tell a completely different story here. Who does the jury believe?
Well, they're going to believe the one with the greatest evidence. And I mean, you have to think about it like this. When a case is built, the prosecution rests and they say, look at my case. Look what I built. The defense tries to tear it down. In this case, they said she was physically incapable of doing it. But now we have this rebuttal evidence that shows very clearly she was physically capable of doing it. They've defeated that explanation. And I think you might see that reflected in a verdict in this case.
Brian Buckmeyer here in New York along with me in studio. So let's talk about a possible innocent explanation for any of this. The Jeep, the potting soil, building a flower bed with these items from the Home Depot. Is there indeed enough of an innocent explanation for the fast-setting concrete mix?
I'm not quite sure. I think this case goes really to the heart of what is reasonable. And I actually do think there could be an innocent explanation. The problem is no one's taken the stand to give it to us. No one's given that information. So we're not left with a reasonable expectation as to why there's some innocence behind this. We're really just left with one story. And I believe the defense is going to come back and say, well, this one pretty good, solid story isn't good enough. And the jurors are going to be left to think, well, what is?
Bernarda Villalona, look, I said the other day on this broadcast that you have to build a circumstantial case brick by brick. I said it again today. And here, the state doesn't have just a couple of bricks. They've got a sidewalk stretching several blocks long, it seems, with all of the circumstantial pieces that they have fit together here. And from where I sit, they fit together rather neatly and nicely for a circumstantial case.
Definitely. The prosecution in this case, not only did they build a sidewalk, they also built a skyscraper. They built everything. They put everything together. Any question you would ask, they have answered it for you. So even the doubt that the defense tried to present of saying maybe it could have been these two other people, they called those two other people being the ex-husband as well as the girlfriend at the time. So even if defense would have been able to argue, well, it could have been either one of them, the people have presented that to you.
And I think that some of the friends who were close to the defendant and who also knew the victim have provided such colorful testimony. We listened to the one witness, the defendant's calling the victim the B word. You've got other harsh language saying, oh, can we give her cocaine and try to kill her that way? I mean, this adds up as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, the reality is that Ashley McArthur, she's a cold-hearted murderer. Execution style, she took out Taylor, and everything that she's saying about her, all the negative comments, and this is supposed to be someone that used to be her friend, and this is how she is characterizing her as.
Thanks a lot to the panel. Harsh opinions across the board here. Closing arguments in this case tomorrow. Brian Ross Investigates is next on the network.